You're tuned to 1520 WCHE Radio, and it's time now for the Avid Reader Show with your host, Sam Hankin. Sam will offer reviews and interviews of some of the more interesting books and authors of today, and now Sam Hankin.
Welcome to another edition of the Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop, the last bastion for those who haven't gone over to the dark side, that is Amazon, which will soon control our reading, our movies, and our television, as well as apparently now our telephone. Well, okay, enough of that. Today we are pleased to have with us Jess Walter, author of the new novel Beautiful Ruins. His previous works include The Financial Lives of the Poets, The Zero, Citizen Vince, Land of the Blind, and the New York Times notable book Over Tumbled Graves. Beautiful Ruins is a story about time, lost and gained, about moments and what moments really mean, about rooms in which everything happens, lives which are broken, salvaged, ruined, compromised, or found. It's both heartbreaking and uplifting. Welcome, Jess, and thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
I like to talk about epigraphs because, as I said to one of our last authors, they're kind of like cliff notes for me. And you give me lots of, fodder, because you have 1, 2, 3 epigraphs. The first one from Voltaire is, "The ancient Romans built their greatest masterpieces of architecture for wild beasts to fight in." Did you come up with these epigraphs before, during, or after the book, or how did they come to you?
I came up with them during. For me, I am a journalist by training, and so, and especially a novel like this, which took place, which formed over such a long period of time, I have these different bouts of research, and I start, looking up. For instance, I'm looking up ruins, just trying to find inspiration. I can be a bit of a thematic writer too, and so sometimes finding some theme will send me off in a direction, connect me back to my characters. And it was sometime around, the idea of that I realized I was going to be writing about Hollywood, and I thought, we think of Hollywood as this, as this entertainment debacle, and yet it's always been that way. And I'm drawn to sort of those writers who used satire, in a historical context, and of course, so Voltaire jumped to mind, and I can't even remember what I was doing when I came across that, but I thought, that's basically reality television. It's we use our greatest technology, which is our masterpiece technology, to show drunk girls fighting on the beach in Jersey.
Right, and that's what a good portion of your book talks about, the reality show and kind of the worst possible reality shows there are.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the epigraphs, and there are really 4. There's an epigraph at the end of the book too, and for me, this is such a book about storytelling and about, for me, trying to put in a kind of historical context the place that we're at as storytellers now, that it felt like they belonged in some way.
Well, it's funny because in the next epigraph, which is kind of there almost because a good portion of your book is about Richard Burton, you talk about what you call the disaster film, Cleopatra, and the quote on that one, I'm just trying to find it right now. Hold on.
I have it in front of me if you want.
Yeah, go ahead and read it to me.
Cleopatra says, "I will not have love as my master," and Mark Antony says, "Then you will not have love," which is, again, I think, emblematic of the theme of the novel. These are people. The title "Beautiful Ruins," I think, covers a lot of ground, but it also covers these people, and I think they're ruined in a way by the people they care for, and yet it makes them the best version of themselves. And so it seemed, ironic to use this film that is the sort of centerpiece of social criticism, but also to use it in a very, hopefully in a way that inspires those characters and the way they act. And that was sort of the balance I was finding throughout the book, was a kind of high-low culture, and taking someone like the movie producer Michael Dean, who's would appear to be the villain of the book in a lot of ways, and always finding some kind of wisdom and larger emotional connection with those people, and so to find that connection with that film, some emotional truism that hovers over the book felt again like this wonderful thing to discover and worthy of sharing with the readers.
It's really funny because Michael Dean, like in his unpublished memoir, he doesn't even know the extent of his evil. He never becomes aware of it. He has no perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's partly true of people in general. I mean, nobody considers themselves the villain of their own story. We're all the hero of our own story. But I also think there's, within his particular brilliance and villainy is a kind of truth, And the funny thing is the balance between his character is his assistant Claire, who he always chides for cynicism. And you'd think of him as a cynical character, the way he manipulates people's lives. But he's not. He's entirely hopeful and forward-looking. I think there's a bit of writing fiction that's a little bit like being an actor and trying to find your way into a character. And finding my way into Michael Dean, I realized, oh my God, he thinks he's right. He thinks he knows what's best for everyone. And what a tremendous power and curse to have when you think you know what's best for for everyone around you and for the entire world. And so, he turned out to be one of my favorite characters to write about.
Yeah, evil characters, not evil, but characters like that who don't recognize their own frailties and flaws. Well, like his agent's letter back to him, I don't think this is going to work, Michael, where he's trying to say, look, you're a complete...
Right. I don't think you realize how this chapter makes you look, right? Yeah, which it's funny to find something sort of endearing in a character whose actions are kind of reprehensible.
Well, it's funny, too, because when you say people sometimes make choices about love, then you will not have love at all. It's like almost like love in the time of cholera,
right.
Where you wait again, like Pasquale, how many years in order to finally achieve that moment that you've been waiting for all your life. And during that time, you're a good man, and you do the best you can, but you don't have the love that you want more than anything in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to write to that point of the novel because, this is a book that's framed very much by one moment that occurs twice. This moment when Pasquale and Dee, have a very brief moment, this brief time together, and to have that, to have it framed by that, I realized that there was going to be some other direction Pasquale was going to take in his life, and I really didn't know what it was. And I have to say, when I got to that point of the book, when I realized what it was he was choosing between, it struck me as proving that point, proving that if you will not have love as your master, you will not have love, all over again. I mean, I think every choice he makes is for love in some way or another. For his, whether it's for his mother or for the women in his lives or his children. I think he's very much driven by that, and it makes for, as all these lives are, for a life of I think utter and glorious imperfection, which is I think all we can strive for.
But think of what you're doing to the reader. I mean, I'm going, please don't get in that boat. Do not get in that boat.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're giving up. I mean.
Yeah. And I think most books are most novels. I think you come back to a certain point where you identify in your own way. And when I look back on my life, there are these moments where, as Pasquale said, I realized I'm going to have the life I'll live and the life that I didn't. And whether that life you didn't live is because of some choice you made or something that didn't occur for you or some failure or just bad luck, it's intriguing to imagine yourself heading off in some direction. I've stayed in my hometown my whole life. I'm 46 years old. I've always lived in Spokane, Washington. And there's a version of me that is at the greatest parties in New York every night, and I always wonder how that guy's doing because it's not the choice that I ended up making. And I'm so happy for the choice I did make, but it doesn't erase the ache for, those dreams and those versions of yourself that you always imagined would be. And I think, I think that's what I was really trying to write toward, was creating a character that that illustrated that in the most dramatic and hopefully poignant way.
Well, there's a couple of things. I had this one personal memory. I was in an airport, I think it might have been in Charlotte, and this beautiful blonde woman walked by me, and we looked at each other as we passed. And we just looked at each other.
Yeah.
And then we walked like 50 feet more. We were walking away from each other. And both of us turned at exactly the same time, looking back. And we both looked each other in the eye, and it was like, oh.
Oh.
And then we just turned back around and kept walking.
Yeah.
And, so you imagine, okay, what was that? What could it have been? But
right.
But in Pasquale's and Dee's situation, and it's almost like, some writers don't like the idea of magical realism or the word or the term,
right.
But like in Love in the Time of Cholera, yeah, it definitely was. But
right.
Here, when they have this moment that's two moments, the reader, at least this reader, it's like, okay, that moment, there's not really any time. And that's what I think Pasquale is saying too. There isn't really any time. They've always been there. And then it's like, all these critics are going about your sprint-like tour de force pace from pages, I guess, 325 to 337, in which the whole world flies by.
Yeah.
And everybody, it's like one of those movies at the end where they have the credits and they say, now he's doing this, now he's doing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, at the end, it's like, some people like when books are wrapped up at the end, some people don't like it. But the thing about this was it really was like the opposite of the Big Bang. It's just like everything came together, and you realize that whether this person is alive, whether this person ever made it home, whether his sister or his daughter is still there waiting for him.
Right. Yeah, thank you. I that was the point I felt like I was writing to. There are 4 different versions of this book, because I started it so many years ago. But the last version of it, I finished a draft in 2008 that was very different and didn't have that ending. And I knew that there was this huge thing missing. And when I went back to it, one of the things that I thought was I wanted it to end. And that's a reverse Big Bang is the best description I've heard of what I was attempting. I didn't want it to be like the credits at the end of some teen movie where it says
like Animal House.
Right. Bobby ended up going on to junior college, or something like that. To me, it wasn't that kind of thing at all. And I think you're exactly right. To me, the novel is about time.
It's the collapse of the wave function.
It is, right? Yeah, and that expression of time as as this powerful force that that unites us and divides us, and keeps this couple that has every reason to be together, keeps them apart for so long, and yet combines them also in this in this amazing moment. It is like the repelling an attraction of atoms almost, of subatomic particles. And so that's what it felt like to me, was this larger sweeping present tense burst of lives. And I didn't, in fact, many of the lives aren't even completed in any way. There are so many tentative endings. What's Pat going to do? Is he going to stay on this path?
I was gonna say that.
Are Claire and Daryl going to stay together? I mean, they don't seem very well suited. Can Claire keep working in this business where, even her great triumph is, the film frontman is so many compromises that it's almost unrecognizable. I didn't feel like it was a Pat ending at all. I felt like it was a big swirling ending that showed that all these stories that hopefully I hadn't tried the reader's patience with, that they were all part of one story, that they were, and again, I kept going back to that title, Beautiful Ruins, and imagining these artifacts, and the artifacts almost springing to life and showing, here's this guy who painted these cave paintings, here's, a guy who had to survive cannibalism and the worst thing you could ever imagine, and here they all are, and so yeah, it was, it was very much the kind of thing I hoped would occur, with the reader, because as a writer, that's what I felt like it was. I felt as if it was this, that it was making the novel larger. I have a good writer friend named Sam Ligon who talks about a movement at the end sometimes being like a ramp. That the thing takes off, like Evel Knievel over the Snake River Canyon or something.
Yeah.
And I wanted it to feel like a ramp. I didn't want it to feel like it was closing it off, but lifting it up.
What you just said gave rise to about 500 questions in my mind. But one thing I wanted to tell you was, do you know the group? I'm sure you do, the Velvet Underground with Lou Reed.
Sure. Oh,
okay.
Sure.
Well, their first album, this woman Nico sang for them.
Sure.
And like before I even knew about your book a week ago, before I knew I was going to be reading it, I put on my Facebook a version of her singing All Tomorrow's Parties, and I put She Was Always a Beautiful Ruin.
Oh, wow.
And I wrote that before I even know the title of your book.
Wow.
And
yeah.
it's true.
I've seen the phrase a few places, but when I came across it in the Louis Manon article about Richard Burton, it was the first time I'd seen that phrase.
Right, the other epigraph.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I went and looked at that interview, and he doesn't look like a beautiful ruin to me. He looks like he's in the prime of his life. Of course, I'm 60. That's probably why.
Right. Yeah.
But he looks good. He tells his story. He goes, and this is like your book. His father says, "So I hear you're making $50,000 for that movie in Hollywell," and Richard Burton says, "No." And the father says, "Well, I didn't think you were." He goes, "No, I'm making $150,000. And his father goes, "What for?"
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, that was another one of those moments of inspiration that came out of research. Knowing that it was going to be Italy in 1962 led me to Cleopatra, because that was being filmed there, and knowing that it involved this actress in Hollywood, and then the more I read about Richard Burton, the more I just thought this is
the way you painted Richard Burton was so hilarious. It was just the funniest thing.
Well, it's not too far from
No.
the historical Richard Burton, especially in that period, and just to imagine him at the peak of his powers, and I became so enamored with him as an actor and as a character, and I just thought he sort of embodied that question that so many of the other characters are living, which is, are you going to be, when Laurence Olivier asks him, you will of course have to decide whether you're going to be an actor or a household name, and that seemed like the question. It seemed exactly like what so many people were trying to deal with.
Reading that part of the book, I almost got a hangover reading it. I started to feel a little queasy.
I wonder if it's too late to get that as a blurb on the book.
Well, it's because it's red wine, and if you just keep drinking red wine, don't you know how you feel? It's just horrible.
Right.
But he didn't care.
It was so real, I almost got a hangover.
Yeah, except no one knows who the hell I am, so it wouldn't make any difference. Although, yeah, we could do advanced praise. The thing about Daryl is he's so dumb.
Well, I have to have affection for all my characters, so I'll choose a word like uncomplicated for Daryl.
Well, is it the strippers?
Yeah, sometimes you do end up feeling sort of guilty for the trouble you put your characters through, and as Daryl started to take shape, I just thought, oh, Claire deserves so much better, And,
yeah, she does. What's she hanging out with him for anyway?
Well, I mean,
sex.
I don't think it's an unrealistic character to have someone dating beneath themselves. I know plenty of women and people who, you look at the person they're with and you think, can't they see this, But I also thought there was something real. She was such a creature of intellect, from the place she came from. And Daryl was a physical character. She loved, I think it was a kind of straight physical attraction that brought her to him. And I think that's true sometimes. And I think for her, it also, it allowed her to have a release from this job where she didn't come home and was tortured by thinking, but she could sit and watch reality TV and eat KFC with her gorgeous boyfriend, and there's some women who'd go for that deal, I think.
Plus, he did change at the end. Well, that's the other thing about your book. Look at this. I mean, Dee, I'm totally in love with her. I've been in love with her for a week now. Dee's a wonderful person. Pasquale's a wonderful person. Claire's a wonderful person. Lydia's a wonderful person. Pat's a wonderful person as long as he keeps staining the deck. Shane is a wonderful person. Richard Burton is a wonderful person.
Really? I think they're wonderful people or good characters.
Well, no, they all are good people, but the only bad people are Michael Dean, Gualfredo, and Pele. Except I like him too, because he just says, "I think you shot me in the foot."
I think some readers have told me that they think there aren't any likable characters. They think, Claire's too cynical, and I mean, I think, again, I think most people, if you judge them by their intentions and their views of themselves, if you could look through their eye sockets, you'd think, oh, here's someone who can justify their behavior. If you look at Pat's behavior, he's without giving too much away, he's a drug addict who steals repeatedly from his girlfriend, who who cheats on her. She finds him in bed with another woman, and here you are saying he's a good person. I mean, I think if we judge them by their behavior, I think they're incredibly flawed people. But I do.
People who are flawed doesn't mean they're not good.
Oh, I agree completely. But I also think that it's when we look at that question, is this person a good person? Are we judging them by their actions or by their intentions? And the thing about fiction is you can bridge that gap. You can go inside motive, and you can go inside what people, their aspirations and their hopes. I became so fond of Pat, and he's such a rogue character, and the more he would misbehave, I was sort of like the way I described his teachers, just being so charmed by him that it didn't matter what he did, I still seemed to like him.
Well, you made him.
I guess.
The police, when he's sitting there in the cell, and his mom walks in, what does he say? How was your date?
How was your date? Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that that side of him, that here's this guy who's just done a string of awful things, and just when you think, but I needed to show why his mother stayed so loyal to him, and a kid whose first question is, how was your date? It just struck me that's who Pat would be.
I mean, it's interesting the way you create the beauty in Dee and Deborah, because it's not the beauty that you would normally hear or see described in a book, is it?
I hope not. I was flirting with a lot of the kinds of things I avoid in fiction, sentimentality, and the expected. And I tend to like to, I think there's something about me as a writer that is that shies away from the expected. I had a person, an editor at a publishing house, say the problem with your books is they're shaggy dogs. You like you don't like the thoroughbred. You like the shaggy mutt. And I think I tend to. And so, yeah, Dee, when she gets off the boat in that extended beginning, when Pasquale first sees her, one of the things he comments is that he's surprised the beautiful American isn't, well, more beautiful, And to me, it was more about her presence than it really was, the collection of her body parts or her face, or, oftentimes those descriptions will, read like, like a list of attributes, and for me it was more about this connection these two people made at this really important point of their life. And there's no doubt that she's attractive, and that she represents a kind of exotic American beauty that for Pasquale means much more than she could never even know. She represents for him an entire way of life, a movie, something he's seen in the cinema.
Well, it's true though, but think about it, and you created this too. Everyone feels the same way about it. Her,
yeah.
Whether it's Pasquale, whether it's Richard Burton, whether it's Michael Dean, whether it's her girlfriend at school who says, "I would, if I would, if I was you, I would do whatever all day long,"
right,
which is also a really good line.
Okay.
And even what's his name? The guy who wrote the first chapter of his book.
Oh, Elvis Bender.
Right. I mean, and he did the same thing.
The PE teacher, right?
Right.
Yeah, I, she struck me. If you could imagine some classic beauty ending up as a high school teacher, and again, a different classic beauty. I also imagined her as the kind of woman who got better looking the older she got too. That maybe she was sort of ungainly and like a colt almost when she was young.
Coltish, yeah.
Coltish, right? And then as she got older, those sort of pieces coming into place.
Yeah, it was when she was 38 was when that picture was taken.
Right. Yeah, and so I as often with characters, I really can kind of close my eyes and say, oh, that's who this person looks like, and it's not some other actress. It's just I can see these. And if you've seen film actors or actresses, they tend to have these features that strike you in some way. And Angelina Jolie is, of course, probably the most, the example that jumps most to mind. She looks like she's been made by a caricaturist.
Right. I'm just drawn this like in Roger Rabbit.
Yeah, right. Yeah, she looks like she's been drawn for Roger Rabbit. And so I was imagining those sort of features, but on somebody of a different level of sensitivity and artistic integrity, and not that Angelina Jolie lacks those things, but and also sensitivity. I imagined her as this sort of person who could be heard in that way. And it's funny how long you carry characters around. And again, because I started this book, I started it in 1997.
Wow.
I knew very little about the characters. My mother at the time was dying of cancer, and she'd never been to Italy, and I'd just returned, and I wanted to write a character who's about my mother's age, arriving in one of the villages I'd visited. And as I went back, I would set the novel down and write a new novel every time. I probably got 30 pages in the very first time, and then 60, and in between I wrote 5 other novels. And every time I would return to it, those characters would change a little bit. But Dee and Pasquale have probably been some version of themselves for almost 10, 12 years, some really close versions. So to live with those characters that long, every time I went back to the book, I would tear it back down to the very beginning, to that moment when Dee arrives. And every time I jumped back in, it would be like, oh, there they are. I could see them. I knew what they would say. I knew how they'd react in certain situations. And
that's really cool, because it's like you're almost like Elvis to a certain extent in that one book, and then Lydia writes that play, which is about the real lives that happen in the book. I mean,
it's a little meta, but I was very much Elvis Bender. That's how he came into the book. Was I kept writing this chapter over and over, and over that period of time, I started working in Hollywood a little bit. So I started folding that, and it became this thing where, in a fictional way, I would fold in all these things that I was considering, and in that period of time, as 15 years passes, it can't help but be about the passage of time. And as a book that begins with the memories of my mother, which remain so profoundly real to me, it couldn't help but be about the power of memory and of and of all those things. And of course, it has nothing to do with the original impulse that started me writing. And I think that's kind of the beauty of fiction, is that it can lead you in these directions. My hero was always Kurt Vonnegut, who used to say, "This isn't my life. This is what life feels like to me." And I think throughout those 15 years, I kept trying to make this book reflect what life feels like.
I met him one time. It was really nice talking to him. It's funny because, look, you do the same thing. He puts, Kilgore Trout in his books with him.
Right.
And talk about meta. Do you know what a tesseract is?
I'm sorry, what?
A tesseract?
A tesseract? No, I don't think so.
It's a cube in 4 dimensions.
Oh, sure.
And there's this, Robert Heinlein wrote this book called And He Built a Crooked House. And it's like 6 cubes, like that picture by Salvador Dali where the crucifix, where Jesus is kind of floating in front of these cubes. And so what happens, he builds it in Southern California, and in the middle of the night there's an earthquake, and all the cubes collapse on themselves. And they become a hypercube, and then you look out each window and you see a different universe.
Wow.
And that kind of reminds me of what you did.
Wow. Well, certainly unintentionally, if I was building cubes.
Well, you know, the other thing that's really cool is that the cover of your book is like one of the best covers ever, don't you think?
Oh, I'm probably a difficult judge of that, but when I saw it, I thought it was perfect. You know, I thought it captured the time and the timelessness, and it's, you know, the village in the book, Porta Vergogna, is completely invented, but it's just down the cliffs from the Cinque Terre, and that, of course, is Manarola, one of the cities in the Cinque Terre. So, yeah, I thought it captured it perfectly. I mean, if you think about the village that I'm writing about, is much smaller than that.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one thing I would say.
But it would look like that. That's how it would look.
The cover is, you know, I have one that has Broad Art cover and it's signed, and it doesn't look like it's from 2012. It looks like it's from 1955.
Yeah, I think it is an older image. I'm not sure when it came from, but you know, my last few novels, I've been thrilled with the design. It just feels like this last piece that brings it all together, you know, which isn't always the case for authors. So
and
I've been very fortunate.
And it makes a very, very big difference in terms of sales, because whether you like it or not, people do judge a book by its cover.
Yeah, I've never heard that. No, just kidding. Yeah. Yeah, I suppose it does. You know, you know, this is my sixth novel, so I'm just thrilled to have great sales, but I also have never seen that as the measure of great fiction. You know, otherwise Nora Roberts would have a Nobel Prize. You know, and so you know, fiction sells when people connect with it. But people also connect with, and some of my favorite books are not books that were bestsellers or that you know, that even the culture has a broad awareness of. So, you know, it's incredibly rewarding to have this book selling well, but it also wouldn't have diminished my enjoyment of it, just, you know, to have the people connect the way they have, how to get the reviews that it's gotten, and, you know, to get those sorts of great emails I'm getting from readers.
Yeah, you were featured in that magazine, The Week, which a lot of people actually read. You were in there this week, along with Gone Girl, the woman I interviewed right before you.
Gillian Flynn.
Yeah, she was really nice.
Yeah, no, it's really been nice, and, you know, especially, you know, like most writers, I have those stories of suffering through, you know, difficult periods where my books weren't selling, and, you know, I was afraid I'd have to come up with a new name to write under, and, you know, book tours where it was me and the bookstore owner in the store, and so it's been rewarding to have this one connect the way it has.
Did you have a name in mind?
I didn't. You know, it probably would have been something manlier, though. You know, so maybe something from an old soap opera. You know, Colt Bludgeon or something like that.
Well, Shane's good.
Shane Bludgeon, maybe. I think Bludgeon needs to be the last name.
Well, you know, it's funny, the cover, the town is bigger than what it's supposed to be, but at least you don't have a cantilever tennis court on the cover.
No, right. Yeah, I wanted to give Pasquale the most ludicrous. The story really is about people's dreams and ambitions, and I didn't, you know, everyone else is a kind of artist, and art, you know, I mean, just being a novelist is such a you know, ridiculous thing to achieve, to aspire to, you know, especially in the culture now. And so I wanted Pasquale to have the audacity of some of the other dreamers, that, you know, for it to be something other than art. And so, you know, looking at those cliffs, I just thought, you know, if he really wants this to be a resort, he'd want a golf course and a tennis court. And,
it's such a Sisyphean task when he's throwing those.
Well, his beach is bad enough, but there are beaches there. You know, but tennis courts would be beyond human endeavor, I think, in a place like that.
Well, I was when I was reading this, when they returned to the place, to the bunker, and I was in my bed reading it, and I was crying. But that's not really good praise, because I cry at McDonald's commercials.
Do you? Yeah, I can get sort of weepy reading books or seeing sports stories. For some reason, they short circuit my tear ducts, and I just go right to it.
It depends on.
I've gotten some really nice emails. My favorite was from a woman who just wrote the shortest email. It said, "I just finished your book and I can't get out of my chair," and I thought that was the nicest praise.
I didn't know what to do. It was 4:00 in the morning. I read it in one sitting, and I read it one sitting, and
Thank you.
I got on my bed. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm the only one in the house, and I just stood up and I went, okay, now what?
Wow, thank you so much.
And then I started thinking, what the hell did I do with my life? And then I got really pissed off at you.
Oh, I apologize for that. Yeah, that was unintended.
Anyway, I could keep asking you all kinds of stuff, but I think that really capsulizes the book. I mean, it's just it's like you were saying about meta. It's not in the sense of metafiction. It's just the idea that you are in a very nice way telling people that whatever choices they make, and you actually even say it in the book, those are your choices. And Michael Dean, as bad as he is, said you make these choices. These are your choices. That's your life. And I think that's kind of uplifting in a lot of ways. It gives people kind of a break from having to feel either guilty or anxiety or worry or pressure or any of those emotions that don't have any upside.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny because I've often been called dark, and some of my fiction can be sort of dark. I feel like life can be incredibly difficult, and so it's been funny and rewarding, I guess, to have a book called Uplifting. It certainly isn't something I've ever thought, except in terms of what I was describing before, the shape of the story. This sort of pulling together that lifts the whole thing off. But one of my favorite reviews said that this book takes the tricks of the postmodern novel and scours out the cynicism.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I did want to do. Looking back over this, the last 15 years when I've raised my children and lost people and gotten married and fallen in love and gotten married and also had just a full life of both really difficult times and really rewarding times, and realized how else could it be but that collection of things, and regrets too, and to sort of claim your regrets as another of those beautiful ruins, those things that didn't come to pass. And I think upon finishing the book and looking back on the last 15 years, I felt that very sort of passage. Wallace Stegner has a phrase that was the title of one of his books, Crossing to Safety.
Yeah.
And I think in my mind there was a sort of crossing to acceptance for a lot of these characters, in which no matter how difficult their lives were, whatever choices they made, that there was a moment in which their life was their life, and to step back and acknowledge, the power and beauty of it was, I suppose that could be uplifting, but again, unintended.
Well, all right, 2 more things that sound like compliments, and I'm gushing, but I'm not, because I don't want you to think I'm gushing over you, and definitely not gushing over you.
No, I'll take it. But others love gushing.
But it's really hard to write a book in a society full of cynicism, self-referential type behavior. It's really hard to lose the cynicism without becoming Thomas Kincaid. As I call him, masturbator of light. And that was really good, because that's why it is uplifting, because you don't you take it away without you take it away, and then it becomes like real life, and that's why people are so attached to it, because hey, this is just like, it's not just like real life, this is real life. And then the second thing is,
I'll have to make that the second part of your blurb, not Thomas Kincaid.
Do I get paid for any of this stuff?
No, I think blurbs are pro bono.
Like log rolling in our time, but then I have to write something. So if I write a book, you'll do it?
Well, you can just put the same quotes on it. We'll just double them up.
More advanced. My advanced praise is going to be way in advance.
Right.
And the other thing, and then we can end it, which I don't want to do, is names. I mean, look, I remember everybody's name. You've read a good book when you remember everybody's name.
Oh, that's great to hear. It's always one of the difficult things. I sometimes fall back to my 1970s baseball card collection. that have characters named Davy Concepcion and Pete Rose and things. So I have to be careful.
I can't do that because my mother threw them all away, as she said.
Yeah, most mothers do.
She said.
Yeah, and going back to what you said about that avoiding being treacly and avoiding over romanticizing. That I was introduced at one of the readings, and the person was just reading from some ad copy or something, and said, and now in his most romantic novel yet, Jess Walter, blah blah blah. And I laughed when I got up there because I've never even approached romance in a novel. So I said at the time that my most romantic novel was like Denny's most gourmet meal, it hadn't occurred yet. So I'm glad that I, at least in your eyes, that I avoided that over sentimental quality that for me can really make fiction unbearable.
Yeah, and that's why it's. This sounds like another compliment. Shit.
You got to get over that unwillingness to compliment.
Well, no. There's some people that I get on here. I just say, how were you able to write such a horrible book? And then they hang up, and I don't have an interview. No, I do it. No, it all boils down to just, like I said, whether it's. I don't know. Well, last question. I know I've said that already. But last question. So when you get done with this and you send it out into the world, and this is your little baby grown up now for all this time, 12 years or whatever, do you leave it up to the reader? Do you feel it's the reader's book then and not yours, or are you?
I always, in a way, yes. I always feel like I'm the first reader, and a pretty good reader and a pretty good judge of things. So I generally trust my own instincts, and then of course when I finish it, I'm sure it's just awful, and I second guess everything, and I feel like I've done this wrong and that wrong. And there's a period where I just despise it, and if my editor would let me, I'd pull it back and work on it for another 15 years. So, but once I've passed through those phases, there was a moment when I finished writing this, and I had the same reaction you did. I found myself so incredibly moved and attracted to these characters, and so I think I believed pretty deeply that I'd pulled it off. But then the next part is up to the reader, and it's what's so amazing about books. Unlike movies, which are so passive, every reader is going to bring something to it. And I've realized a long time ago that not every reader can love everything. And I'll already have some readers tell me, oh, this isn't as good as X, or boy, I sure liked Citizen Vince, that's a much better book, or this isn't as good as Financial Lives of the Poets. Others say, this is by far your best book, which makes me think they must have really hated the other stuff. But whatever their reactions are, it's because it's almost like a piece of music that you've written that they're now playing and performing themselves. Because when you read a book, you are filling in all those gaps and creating those characters in your mind, and you're not seeing the same Dean Murray that I am. So I'm incredibly moved and respectful of that part of the process when the reader starts playing the song of it. And sometimes they've played it more recently than I have. It's fresher in their mind. Sometimes they've gotten something out of it that maybe I didn't intentionally put in or intuitively put in, or didn't even know was in there. And so it's such a rewarding part. And with this book especially, because I think it's touching readers in a way that that maybe not all my books have, and so it's been
I think so too.
To hear from them. Yeah.
It's funny whenever I write something and someone reads it and they go, "Wow, this is really good." I always say, "Wow, you must have led a really sheltered life."
Yeah, that's the other side of it. Is when people tell me I've had a couple of it's the best book I've ever read. I immediately give them 10 quick suggestions.
Right? Did you ever hear War and Peace?
Yeah, you need to get out more.
All right. Well, we've been talking for 43 minutes and 31 seconds. So.
All right. Well,
I could keep
really
talking.
Appreciate it. It was great.
Yeah,
Fun.
I really enjoyed talking to you. So next book around, we'll talk to you again.
All right.
Okay.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Jess Walter, author of Beautiful Ruins. I know I sounded like I was like his best friend in the world. It was just a wonderful book, a wonderful read. As I said, I read it in one sitting. You care so much about the characters. You remember who they are. You know their lives. And you're also like drawn in so completely that, as he said, in a kind of meta way, that you're almost a part of the book. So that was really fun. He seems like a great guy. Next week we're going to be talking to April Bernard, who wrote this book, Miss Fuller. Miss Fuller was this real person. In 1850, she was a feminist, a journalist, an orator, and the most famous woman in America. So she's coming back from Europe, where she was covering the Italian Revolution for the New York Tribune. And she gets into a shipwreck, and her whole family dies. And back home, Ralph Waldo Emerson and her other friends send Henry David Thoreau to the wreck in hopes of recovering her last manuscript. He comes back and he says he couldn't find it, but actually he's found, well, I won't go on any further, but it's a really interesting and surprising book. So next week on the Avid Reader, we'll be talking to April Bernard about her new book, Miss Fuller. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will talk to you again next week.
You've been listening to the Avid Reader Show with your host, Sam Hankin. Sam will be back next week with reviews and interviews of some of the more interesting books and authors of today.